When we consider a game between two very highly skilled players, it's often small things that decide the outcome. Such is the case in my game of the day from round 3 of the 2016 British Chess Championships. It's the game between Grandmaster David Howell and Jovanka Houska, England's strongest female player for quite some time. Of course, playing Howell these days is quite tricky because he generally ducks theoretical challenges in the opening, preferring quiet setups as we have here. Setups which seem innocuous but which contain more than a dash of poison. White intends to find a setup which keeps the tension and creates a difficult middle game. And by so doing, Howell hopes to outplay the opponent. Well, Houska decides to set up very solidly with a Queen's Gambit set up, just Bishop e7, castles, Knight c3 by White, and now Black makes the fundamental decision to play c5. This, to an extent, gives Black freedom of movement. It enables Black to get her minor pieces out very easily, and then the Queen and the Rooks can flow out. The only drawback might be that White can loosen Black's pawn formation by taking on d5. But this hasn't worried very many strong players from going into this formation. This is what we call the Tarrasch setup in the Queen's Gambit. Black just accepts a slight loosening of the pawn structure in return for free and easy development. Well, knight to c6, and White contents himself again with modest play, bishop e2. In due course, White intends to try and put some pressure on d5. It's the classic battle in the Tarrasch setup. And Black decides to go bishop g4, another free-flowing move. Now, there is a very similar line in the actual Tarrasch variation where White's light squared bishop is on g2, where Black can stick the knight in on e4 here, intending bishop f6. And I wonder whether this was a viable approach in this particular position. The idea is that if White takes on c5 straight away, Black's not going to recapture, she's going to play bishop f6. And now if rook c1, queen a5, getting active before White gets castled. Probably White's best move now is knight d4. And I think now Black can take on c5. And of course what White doesn't want is another capture on d4, shutting down the diagonal. So he's probably got to take on c6. We recapture, he castles, knight e6. To me, this looks better than what Houska obtains in the game. Running that line one more time, knight e4. Let's say White castles. I mean, that looks like a all-round better move than d takes c5. Well, again, we're going bishop f6. Okay, this reaches a rather dry position if White takes on e4 and then plays knight e5. But, yeah, I think Houska would have settled for this. What's wrong with Black's position? White can try and attack the pawn in the middle. Black can bring her queen up to defend it, and then the bishop comes out. No problems for Black. Everything's well defended. Okay, that was another approach. Bishop g4 has been favoured extensively here. And now White decides to just take on c5, followed by castles. So everything's going to hinge on whether Black can develop sufficient activity to compensate for this obvious weakness in the middle of the board. And of course, Black's always going to be on the lookout for a move like d4, which cannot be played in this current position because of the simple knight a4. But it's a way of liquidating the weakness. So rook to c8, another very easy move, good move, sensible. And after h3, Black drops the bishop back to e6, content that she may have created a slight weakening of the pawns around White's king. At some stage, maybe Black can consider moves like queen to d7, and then who knows, a sacrifice on h3. So Howell decides to just play bishop d3. Queen comes to e7. It's hard to believe that White can obtain a great deal with this setup. I mean, it's pretty solid for Black, this, and as we'll see, I think Black does miss some chances a bit later on. But it's a position where I think Black is obliged to be very precise. And this is the type of pressure that Howell is bringing to bear. He wants to force his opponent to be completely precise. Knight to e2. Well, okay, there was a previous game from Tehran in 2016 between Batsiashvili and Zhu, Chinese Grandmaster, where white played rook c1, black played rook fd8, knight e2, and now a similar move to the game, bishop a3. Knight e2, as played by Howell, doesn't really change very much. Black plays bishop a3 anyway, and white decides not to take, instead preferring queen to b1. If black wants to take, so be it. Why should white take? I'm not sure. Just allows the black queen into a good square. White can blockade in the middle, and now probably black does best to play knight e5. And after knight f4, take the bishop off. Okay, it's probably a fraction better for white, but black's queen is active on a3. Black shouldn't have too many causes to worry in this particular situation. Queen to b1. Now this is the first point where I think Jovanka's slightly too anxious to take some pieces off the board. She played bishop takes b2. But perhaps it was better just to make another move here. I mean, if white wants to take on a3, then let him. For instance, h6, something like that. Give the king a bit of luft. That must be a sensible move. Or you might also play rook fd8. It's one of those moves, you know, you're wondering where to put your rooks. Okay, if you put your rook there, when you station your rooks, you shouldn't really station them in a truly defensive fashion. There should be some point to that move. So we're looking for black to think about d4 a bit later on when he plays rook fd8. Probably knight f4 by white, and then again this move h6. Just don't take on a3 for the b2 for the time being. Just make some constructive moves elsewhere. But again, there's nothing wrong with bishop takes b2. I guess it's just a style thing. It seems to me to just attract white's queen to a better square, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Anyway, she intended knight b4. And now white's got to probably give up the light square bishop. Doesn't want to play bishop b1, blocking in the rook. So Howell brings his rook out, and again, black is keen to get the pieces off the board. Well, what can we say about this position? Howell has probably got what he wanted. It's a technical situation. Black's still got the isolated pawn. Potentially this bishop on e6 is rather poor. But at the same time, you can't win a chess game generally by focusing on one weakness in the enemy camp. The pawn on d5 in itself can be defended. So if Howell wants to win this game, he's basically got to work up play elsewhere to try and stretch the black position on a number of fronts. I think black's position is satisfactory here. You know, it should be equal, just slightly more pleasant for white. So bishop f5 attacking the rook. Was this another moment where black could have considered h6? I don't know. Again, that looks very useful to me. Once again, maybe rook c5. And black can find a number of useful things to do. If we play as per the game, where Howell tries to exchange off the active black rook, then I think we can just play b6, and if knight fd4 double up, this is the type of thing that says to white, well, break me down. Nothing wrong with my position, all my pieces are in play, you've only got one small weakness to aim at, break me down. And I imagine this position is almost equal. Very, very small edge to white, but very hard to crack black's structure. Jovanka prefers bishop f5, and of course the rook moves. She takes, white takes back with the knight, and now the bishop comes to e4. Knight comes to d4, protecting against the threat, and now black plays another very sensible move, queen to e5, just centralising the queen. Once again, I think in the commentary room we were just looking at rook c8. I suppose white plays rook c1, and then again this move h6. Well, not much has changed in this position. You know, white's got a technical edge after something like knight ce2, but with only one weakness to work with, you know, it's, once again, tough to win this. But that wouldn't have stopped Howell from trying hour after hour after hour. And I suppose that's why Jovanka prefers just to keep pieces on now, get the queen up to e5 in a nice central location. And after rook c1, she played h5. Bit more aggressive than h6. Black's now starting to think about a kingside attack. Is it really implausible to imagine that Black will put the pawn on h4 and then maybe plough through with g5, g4? Looks possible. So Howell starts the action on the queen side with a very good move, queen to a3. And it's from here on in that White's advantage starts to build, because already there's uncomfortable pressure against the queen side. If a6, then I think just knight ce2, taking the file, and if h4, the white queen creeps into Black's position with noticeable effect. It's clear now that the bishop on e4 is not really doing very much, and White is starting to infiltrate. So from here on in, it's not lost, but uncomfortable. And rook a8 gives an indication of the lack of harmony in Black's camp. I mean, Jovanka would not have wanted to play that move for sure. And Howell moves his queen in, queen to c5. Well, now comes a mistake, which indicates to me that Jovanka doesn't really like her position. She played knight to d7. What could she have done? Well, she could have tried queen to g5, threatening checkmate. Of course, White can take the knight and then go queen to c7. But how bad is Black's position after queen f6? Not sure. Black creates some counterplay here, and then after rook c2, maybe she could defend with knight d6. Not sure. Queen c5, queen e5. White has still to display a winning plan, so maybe that would have been a tougher way to play than the game itself, because after knight d7, queen b5 is now a very good move. Suddenly there's pressure all over the place, and after knight b6, Howell took the bishop, queen takes, and now really the winning move, a4. So by technical means, by very quiet means, he's starting to outplay his formidable opponent. And this is the way top players win games. They keep the pressure on, maybe working with a slight edge all the way through, and the other guy can't shake it off. And that's exactly what happens in this game. As Jovanka tries to exchange some pieces, White's not having any of it. But perhaps there was a more accurate move here, with the computer suggesting the unusual queen f1. This was not a move we considered in the commentary room, and it's quite a difficult move to see. Well, David Howell didn't even play it. But it seems to be best. The exchange of rooks is forced, and now the point is to put the queen in on c7. A lot of action from the white queen there, and after b6, a6, yeah, I think this is a fairly clear-cut win for White. Well, he doesn't do this. He comes out with another good move. Perhaps queen f1 was the absolute best, but rook d1 is pretty good too. And after rook c5, knight f5. Well, was that best? I don't know. White could have considered queen b4. Knight f5 was answered by queen f8. Now, Black was getting into some time trouble here. We wondered whether Black could try rook takes b5. It looks absolutely ghastly because White can go into a rook ending, material ahead, like this. Black's got to play rook a5, and now White can go rook takes d5. But the point is now that Black doesn't need to take on a7. Instead, he could check and go g6. And I wonder just how holdable this is. I mean, it's not nice, clearly. You know, White's a pawn up. Black's king is worse, his rook is worse. I doubt this can be held, but without a passed pawn, it's not 100% clear cut. White would still have some work to do. In the game, after queen f8, queen b4, knight c8, queen takes b7, White's already done the job to an extent, and suddenly Black has got too many pawn weaknesses to nurse all over the board. The knight on c8 is on a shaky square. So after g6, b4, rook c4, queen takes d5, I think we can confidently say that White has now a completely won position. So the game finished. Rook takes b4, knight d4, knight e7, queen d7. Howell systematically improving the position of his pieces, and the rook now infiltrates with decisive effect. and in desperate time trouble, black makes a blunder. Even if she plays rook e8, just queen d6, and black is almost paralysed. But knight d5, well, that just loses the knight, and after check, king h2, queen b8, queen takes f7 check. Black resigned. So one of those games which, to me, shows why David Howell is one of the favourites in this tournament. Relentless pressure all the way through, working with only a slight edge, and outmanoeuvring an extremely dangerous opponent en route. So certainly at the end of this tournament, David Howell is going to be right up there as one of the perhaps winners. So thank you for viewing.